Hey CDA, and this is my guide on the TAHUKS faction of Endless Legend 2. These are the guys that you want to play when you want to play it smart. This faction has several ways of having that science flow into their coffers, but the main way initially is going to be the Observatory. You can see one over here. This is a building that you build on top of a ridge, or a mountain as I would call them, but in the game they're called a ridge. These are super cheap to build, as you can see, just a little bit of dust, and you can build them on any ridge, including those ones that are not inside your territory. Now there is a limit on it, because you can only build one per territory. So I built one over here, so that means I cannot just spam additional observatories over here, but I can just go to my unit and say, hey, there's a ridge over here, go and build me a observatory over there. Now these things have several uses. The first one is a very straightforward one. They provide vision in a range of 5 all around the observatory. So you can see over here there's kind of this hex type of area completely revealed, and that's not because I did any exploring. Just by building the observatory you can keep an eye on anything happening in a pretty large region. And remember, this is for every single observatory, so you can very easily cover an entire portion of the map in line of sight without having any units in there. However, the main benefit of these observatories is that they are going to start out producing 10 science per turn each. So if you have multiples of this, and this is pretty easy to do, as you can see there's several ridges around here already, then you can give your science production in the early game a massive boost. Now as you get further into the game, this amount will be increasing as well. So, you know, this is an almost free building that does a lot of heavy lifting for your science. You also have the option to upgrade your observatories if you want. You can upgrade them into Sacred Flames, which is going to turn them into defensive turrets that can actually shoot on enemy armies. Not necessarily something you are going to use on the offense, but you know, defending your cities is going to be pretty easy once you have several of these defending your territory. But the more common way to upgrade them, and that's the one I'm going to recommend, is turning them into libraries. This is going to give your cities an additional approval bonus in addition to what they already have. So it makes managing all your population, which we'll get to in a moment, a lot easier. But on top of that, it's going to give other empires the ability to buy research technologies in this library. Now, I haven't really seen the AI interacting with this, so I'm not entirely sure if this is either bugged or simply something they don't care about. But you know, the approval bonus by itself is already very useful at the very low cost of just a couple of resources. And if that wasn't enough yet, you also get a couple of counselors that will increase the value of your observatories even further. Although I do have to say this one seems to be a little bit bugged at the moment, but even then the observatories are going to be awesome to get as soon as you can. While playing as this faction, you're pretty much guaranteed to get a ridge, although the size of it might vary, in your starting territory on your first turn. Now that does mean that if you're a little bit unlucky, that ridge can spawn like right in the middle, really putting you in an awkward corner. So I've had some very bad starts with this faction in particular. However, if you get a little bit more lucky like I've gotten over here, then you might be able to set your city down right next to a ridge. And remember that if you build a ordinary workshop, then this will get a bonus not just from being on industry, but also from every adjacent ridge. And as you can see, I have 3 of those here, so this is a particularly good location for a works district. Now, you might not always be able to pull this off, but it is worth keeping in mind because you will always have a ridge in your starting territory, so take advantage of that while you're building your first city. Another special building this faction gets is the Holy Oculum, which is pretty much another laboratory. However, it is a very strong one. It gives you plus 10 science to begin with. In addition to that, it's going to reduce the cost of all your other laboratories, so you can build a lot of science buildings very cheaply. And in addition to that, it's going to give you a plus 10 bonus to science for every laboratory that you build next to it. So that means you want to ideally build it in an open space like I've been doing over here, so you can start surrounding it with laboratories to really maximize the output. I mean, here's the same location near the end game, and you can see I just completely filled in this entire area with level 2 laboratories. And let's check the output. This single building over here is already producing 160 science by itself, and the laboratories on top of that are producing a massive amount of science in addition to that. So yeah, there's about as much science being produced in this little cluster over here than I've had with some other factions around this time throughout the entire game. However, even before you get this completely overpowered, it will start ramping up your science really quickly. You can see just with a couple of laboratories over here, it's already up to 42 science. But more importantly, or at least as important as that, is the fact that you get access to some special skills that only unlock once you have this building up and running. These are special abilities that you need to charge up by spending some science into them in order to activate them. That will give you various benefits that can really help you supercharge your empire. The first of these abilities is called Star's Light. This is going to target one of your observatories and give it a permanent, yes, permanent bonus to influence. Now, of course, it's already producing science, so giving another 5 influence on top of that is awesome. But in addition to that, whenever you use this ability, you're going to get a free population in one of your cities that is called a cold population. Now, these guys are a little bit weird. They actually give you a pretty hefty minus to your approval. However, they also have a very strong effect. You can see this guy by itself is already producing 10 dust per turn. Now, you can get one of these every time you use a special ability, so this is going to ramp up pretty fast. As an example of that, there's the special ability called Eternal Sunshine, which you can use on a city to give it a 10-turn bonus to its production, or specifically to the production of your population. This is going to straight up just double the benefits that you get from that. As you can see over here, normally you would get a plus 12 from these artisans, now it's a plus 12 and again for the Eternal Sunshine. And the more population that you have, the more effective this is going to be. At the end of those 10 turns, this is going to spawn 3 cold population on top of that. So again, make sure you don't overpopulate your cities too much, but this is a very strong ability that you could pretty much just use on cooldown on each of your cities. Now, you do need to charge this up. It does cost a fair amount of science in order to do so, but the production bonus that you get, especially on the cities with a significant population, is going to be worth it. If you want to leverage your cult population even further, you can use the ability called Service of Spirit. This is going to turn your population into destitute people, so you can see that over here. I can move these around, so these are now stuck in here. They do produce a massive amount of stuff, at the cost of course, a pretty hefty approval deficit. Now, all in all, I would say that this production is probably still worth it, but be careful when you use this ability, because obviously you do not want to tank your approval. However, luckily it is actually pretty easy to keep your approval up high, because you can also have some festivals going. Now, a Tahuk festival is a special ability where you sacrifice a population, and that is going to give you a massive amount of science, industry, influence, and approval for at least a short amount of time. Keep in mind though that you are going to be sacrificing a population in order to do that, and that cost is going to increase every time you use this ability, so use this with care. Ideally, you should just build up your approval by getting all the buildings and technologies associated with increasing your approval. It's pretty easy to do unless you're playing at the highest difficulties, so you shouldn't be struggling with that too much as long as you pay a little bit of care in how fast you're growing your city. Even though I don't recommend using the festivals on cooldown, or actually maybe not at all, just be very careful whenever you use that. If you are going to be using them, make sure you pick up this counselor. This counselor, Buhan Perbasi, gives you a +5 to every single type of production whenever you make a festival happen. So this is going to replace the production of that population you just sacrificed. Last but not least, I want to call out Nereva Racia. Those names are very hard to pronounce, by the way. Which, especially later on in the game, is going to give you a massive bonus to your science production for all your population, but again at the cost of approval. So, long story short, you do necessarily need to manage your approval with this faction, because you don't want your cities to be underproducing because they're unhappy. And although this holds for every faction in the game, if you manage to keep your empire approval high enough, you are going to get a pretty massive bonus to influence, dust, and science. And because science is everything we're trying to do with this faction, that is a massive amount of additional production just from keeping everyone happy. It's also worth noting that if you ever find yourself with too many population, you can use the special ability called Esoteric Delegation. This is going to send all the cold populations from a single city to your enemies' cities. Yes, not to your other cities, to your enemies' cities. You can't control which ones go where, but they are going to be spread around as equally as possible. They will give you vision over that city, but in addition to that, they are going to still give you a bonus to your Oculum level for every single missionary that you have. So it's kind of a way to kind of spy on your enemies, or get rid of unwanted population yourself. But all in all, I've not really find myself using this a lot, mostly because these populations in your own cities are typically very useful to have around yourself. Then there is one last Oculum ability that I skipped for now because it works slightly different. This is the dissection, which is going to turn an entire territory into glass. So if you look at this territory over here, there's a lot of production, some food, etc., going on over here. If I use this dissection on a observatory in this territory, it is going to literally turn every single one of these nodes into glass. Now, the benefit of having glass in your territory is the fact that, as you can see, this produces a lot of science. So every single piece of glass over here is going to produce 5 science, and I can increase that even further with some technologies that you can discover later on, where they're going to start to produce both science as well as dust. Here you can see a late game version of that, where I just expanded my districts all over the place, grabbing as many of these tiles as I could, while getting a total of 10 dust and 10 science for each single one of those tiles, even without any buildings on them. So really strong, but make sure you use this with care, because you are removing all the food and production from these tiles, so you don't want to get your city stuck as a result of using this ability. You can't easily revert it. However, if you do want to revert it, there is still the landscaping option to restore your tiles back to their normal state. But that's pretty much going to be a waste of dust and effort if you keep changing things back and forth. So, long story short, think before you use this ability. That said, especially in the late game, you typically have a couple of zones that you're not going to be developing in detail anyway, so you might as well turn them into something useful. While playing this faction, especially in the early and in the mid-game, you can get into a weird situation where you've unlocked so many technologies that you actually have a lot more buildings than you can build in your cities. Now, especially on higher difficulties, this is a common problem in general anyway, but keep in mind that you want to keep prioritizing what you actually need and not just randomly spamming buildings just because you have so many options. Don't queue all of them up at the same time either, because you're probably going to want to reprioritize somewhere along the way, and then you don't get any notifications anymore, and you might just get a very messy city. Keep that in mind. This is going to most likely not be a problem when you get to the late game, because you unlock less buildings at that point, and in addition to that, the technologies do come in a little bit slower. But all in all, keep in mind that you get a lot more access to technologies than you might know what to do with initially. Also keep in mind that a lot of these technologies are going to give you a passive bonus to your empire in general. And that bonus is going to kick in as soon as you research those technologies. So if you are in doubt what to pick, and you have to pick between something that does give you a passive bonus and one that doesn't, you might want to consider just picking up the bonus, because that is going to be useful from the term that you discover it. In terms of the faction-specific technologies, there's not much to talk about. Pretty much every single one of them just increases your science, and does so in a way that completely aligns with what you're going to be doing anyway. It's going to increase the production on your observatories, on your population, things like that. I don't think actually there's anything that doesn't do exactly that, or it's just going to improve your army, of course, but other than that, it's just science, science, and more science. So, does that mean you should be going for a science victory with this faction and just that? Well, no, not really actually. Because you get so much science, you can really upgrade your economy and even your army if you want to, in such a way that you can pretty much go for any victory, whatever you want. In addition to that, because of the rebalancing that happened earlier this week as I'm recording this, several of the other victory conditions have been made easier to get. No changes were made to the Enlightenment victory condition, which now makes this one of the hardest ones to get. Not necessarily hard per se, but more slow to get. So this is a typical example of how one of my games would look right now. I've literally had to actively stop getting territories, otherwise I will just win the game through this. So this is one of the easiest things to get still. The population and monument victories were actually changed significantly a couple of days ago. It is now a lot easier to build the monuments that you need. You only need 5 of them. It depends a little bit on what game settings you're playing on. But building 5 of these is super easy, as you can see. Just for the fun of it, I just built 4 and then I stopped building them. But more importantly, if you want to go for a multitudes victory, this is one of the easiest factions to do this with as well. You need a certain amount of population in order to do that, but because you get a lot of population from all of your special abilities, especially from the Eternal Sunshine, this is actually a really nice way to get this. Every time you use Eternal Sunshine, you will get 3 additional population over just 10 turns. That is way faster than cities would grow normally. So if you use this on multiple cities, well, you do the math. That is a lot of population in a very short time. In terms of the other faction specifics, the population bonuses that you get are all pretty straightforward. The cold population is going to reduce the cost of your special abilities, so that just means you can use them more often. And the normal population bonuses that you get are, of course, all related to science and upgrading that even further. The units of this faction are pretty decent, I would have to say. The Devotee, the infantry unit, is not that interesting in terms of how it works, but it is a sturdy unit, so it's pretty useful to have. The Initiate is a range unit, which I'm not loving, honestly, because you have the alternative in the Relic Keeper that not only has a longer range, it is also a stronger unit in general. Last but not least, if you get the technology level up high enough, which of course should be pretty easy to do with this faction, you can start making some Wrath Bearers if you need some additional punch. This is again a ranged unit with a massive range of 5 and a massive amount of damage on top of that. So, you know, this is one of the better units in the game, I think. You do need to protect these guys because, of course, they are ranged units, but you can do so pretty well with just some of these infantry units. All in all, I would say that this faction is the most straightforward to play, along with the Kin of Sheridan, if you compare them to other 4X games. But that doesn't mean they're boring to play at all. Managing your abilities, managing the approval, and especially doing little optimizing things like placing your laboratories in the correct place, turning the right territories into ice, etc., is all going to be a big difference between either optimizing that or just clicking something at random. So there's a lot of difference between this faction being played by a beginner player or a more skilled player for sure. If you have any questions about this faction, make sure you let me know. Check out my other guides on the other factions as well if you haven't done so yet. And if you are still here, you are awesome, and I do hope to catch you in the next one.